Prostitution, a condemned vice or an essential part of social life? In ancient Rome, a magnificent empire with sophisticated laws and diverse culture, prostitution was far from taboo. Instead, it was legalized and strictly regulated, openly existing alongside the arenas, theaters, and marble-paved streets of the city. Sound of pounding drums, crowd cheers from the arena, mixed with hurried footsteps on ancient cobblestone streets. Quick cuts shift from the bustling crowd to rows of brothels, dim lights flickering through windows. The courtesans, known as she-wolves, were not just symbols of desire but key players in a complex web of power, politics, and society. Prostitution in Rome wasn't simply commerce, it was an art, a means of survival, and sometimes a tool that shaped history. Are you ready to uncover a world few dare to speak of? A world of desire, power, and hidden struggles beneath the streets of Rome? Join us as we reveal the truth about prostitution in ancient Rome, where Lupanaria were more than brothels, they were part of history itself. In ancient Rome, prostitution was not an underground or forbidden activity as in many other societies throughout history. On the contrary, it was legalized and regarded as a profession with a defined role in the economic and social life. The Romans had a practical and pragmatic view of sexuality, recognizing it as a fundamental human need that required proper regulation. For this reason, prostitution was organized systematically and strictly controlled by the state. Prostitutes were required to register with the authorities, pay taxes, and undergo medical supervision to prevent the spread of infectious diseases. Legalizing prostitution helped reduce clandestine sex work, child prostitution, and human trafficking, which could otherwise have harmful effects on society. Roman law clearly regulated all prostitution-related activities. Brothels, known as Lupanaria, had to be licensed and operated only in designated areas, often outside the city center to avoid disturbing the daily lives of citizens and the reputation of Rome. These regulations reflected a society striving to balance natural human desires with social order. Moreover, not everyone had the right to work in prostitution. Prostitutes were generally marginalized by society, often slaves, poor women, or those lacking opportunities. They were closely monitored and faced many restrictions on their rights. However, legalization at least granted them a clear social status. They were not treated as criminals or dangerous elements. Interestingly, despite prostitution being legal and regulated, it remained intertwined with many social shadows, exploitation, discrimination, and the conflict between individual desires and moral standards. These contradictions were vividly reflected in contemporary debates and works of art. Prostitution in Roman society was not merely a form of ordinary commerce but played a significant role in many aspects of social, economic, and cultural life. First and foremost, prostitution provided a solution to sexual needs within a stratified society that held strict moral standards. Roman men, especially from the upper classes and nobility, often faced rigid expectations regarding marriage and maintaining family reputation. At the same time, strong sexual desires led them to seek out prostitutes as a socially accepted and safe outlet. Additionally, prostitution was regarded as an economic sector generating substantial revenue for the state through taxation. Prostitutes were required to pay regular taxes, and brothels were under financial supervision. This income was an important source of funding for Rome's public works, military, and various social services. Roman culture also reflected the role of prostitution through festivals, rituals, and art. In many sculptures, paintings, and literary works, the image of prostitutes was not only a symbol of desire but also a part of everyday life. Romans openly mentioned prostitution in humorous stories, social commentary, and even famous poetry. However, prostitution also served as a tool of power and politics. Some well-known courtesans were sponsored by nobles or emperors and became influential behind the scenes in Roman politics. They could gather information, influence key decisions, or ease tensions in conflicts by forming special relationships. Thus, prostitution was far more than just a profession, it was an inseparable part of the social structure of Rome, reflecting the complexity and multidimensional nature of this empire. In Roman society, brothels were known by a very distinctive name, Lupanaria, which means, the place where she-wolves live, a nickname rich with layers of meaning about desire and primal instinct. These Lupanaria were not secretive locations, on the contrary, they existed openly, managed and supervised by Roman authorities. Lupanaria were usually located in designated areas outside the city center, places easily accessible yet without negatively impacting public life. They were built quite sturdily, with small, simple rooms designed to meet the needs of a diverse clientele, from common citizens to wealthy nobles. The operation of brothels was not merely about prostitution, they also served as social hubs where clients and prostitutes could form complex relationships, sometimes lasting for years. The women working there were not always slaves. Some were free women who chose this profession as a means to earn a living or maintain a degree of financial independence in a highly unequal society. Roman brothels were governed by a strict system. Brothel owners had to register with the authorities, pay taxes regularly, and comply with health and safety regulations. Prostitutes underwent periodic health checks to prevent the spread of infectious diseases, one of the greatest concerns in society at the time. The culture surrounding Lupanaria was also rich. Inside the brothels, it wasn't only about sexual services, there were entertainment activities, music, and even performing arts. These spaces were considered part of Rome's nightlife, where the line between sin and pleasure was blurred. However, the open existence of brothels sparked much controversy. On one hand, they helped control prostitution and reduce violence and abuse, on the other, they raised ethical questions about morality and the role of women in society. Brothels became a symbol of the complexity in gender relations, power dynamics, and personal freedoms. Those who practiced prostitution in ancient Rome were often women, and occasionally men, from the lower strata of society, typically slaves, immigrants, or poor women with no other means of survival. They faced social stigma, but there are also stories of resilience and adaptability amid harsh circumstances. Women in prostitution were commonly referred to as meretresses or prostituti. They were strictly regulated, required to register with the state, and subjected to regular health inspections. Despite being looked down upon, some wealthy and famous prostitutes were able to accumulate property, enjoy protection from powerful clients, or even live with more freedom than many other women in society. Additionally, there were prostitutes called scorta, who operated outside the brothel system and were unregistered. These women were often considered part of the criminal underworld and faced the risk of arrest or expulsion. The lives of these prostitutes were harsh. Long working hours, exposure to disease and violence, and pressure from both society and the law. However, in many cases, prostitution also granted them a certain degree of autonomy, allowing them to earn a living and, if fortunate or well-supported, even escape slavery. Male prostitution also existed, though it was less clearly documented. Male prostitutes usually served clients who were men with different sexual preferences or belonged to specific social groups. Their roles reflect the diversity of gender and sexuality in Roman society. The stories of those involved in prostitution are an indispensable part of understanding the complexity of the Roman Empire, where power, desire, and social prejudice intertwined. They were both victims and participants in an organized system, and sometimes even became influential figures behind the scenes. Prostitution in ancient Rome was not merely an economic or social activity but also a cultural symbol reflecting deep contradictions in Roman life and thought. Culturally, prostitution was recorded and portrayed in many works of art, poetry, and literature. Poets such as Catullus, Martial, and Juvenal depicted prostitution with tones that were sometimes humorous, satirical, but also empathetic and contemplative. Prostitution became both a source of inspiration and a subject for critiquing social classes, exposing injustice, greed, and sometimes moral decay. Roman society held a contradictory view of prostitution. Although the profession was legalized and existed openly, those who practiced it were often stigmatized and treated unjustly. They were regarded as a lower class, denied full citizenship rights, and frequently discriminated against in social activities. On the other hand, prostitution was also intertwined with power and politics. Some courtesans became lovers of officials, emperors, or influential figures, thereby subtly influencing political decisions. They could act as informants, intermediaries, or even factors causing political upheavals. The greatest contradiction lay in the society's simultaneous need for prostitution as a means to control and satisfy sexual demands, while also preserving moral image and social order. This led to strict regulations but also created spaces for abuse, exploitation, and injustice. Moreover, prostitution was connected to public health concerns. Sexually transmitted diseases posed a significant threat to Roman society, prompting the state to emphasize inspections and prevention. Legalizing prostitution was also a way to better manage this issue. Thus, prostitution in ancient Rome appears as a multifaceted portrait, both a product of an imperial society and a challenge to moral standards and power, opening various perspectives to understand people and society in antiquity. Although prostitution was legalized and became an indispensable part of Roman life, ineffective management and policy mistakes led to many negative consequences that deeply affected society. One major mistake was the underestimation of long-term health impacts. Despite regulations on health inspections, disease control was neither strict nor effective enough, resulting in the spread of sexually transmitted infections within the community. This not only affected sex workers but also weakened the empire's workforce and military. Taxation policies and brothel management also caused instability. Excessive taxation sometimes pushed prostitutes and brothel owners into underground operations, increasing the risk of exploitation and criminal activities such as human trafficking and violence. The state struggled to control the entire system, allowing underground criminal organizations to flourish. Furthermore, stigma and discrimination made sex workers the most vulnerable group in society. They lacked legal protection, were susceptible to abuse, and had limited access to healthcare and social services. This created a vicious cycle of poverty, illness, and isolation. Social mistakes were also evident in the failure to address the root causes of prostitution, inequality, poverty, and the restriction of women's freedoms. Maintaining the brothel system as a packaged solution merely concealed the problem without improving the lives of those involved. These consequences were not confined to Roman times but serve as important lessons for later societies on how to perceive and manage prostitution. It shows us that without fairness and effective regulation, prostitution easily becomes a tool of injustice and suffering. Prostitution in ancient Rome leaves behind a complex legacy, both a valuable source for studying society and culture, and a persistent topic of controversy regarding ethics, human rights, and the role of women in society. Culturally, many surviving Roman artworks, architecture, and literature show that prostitution was seen as part of everyday life. Images of courtesans, brothels, and related activities appear in murals, sculptures, and historical records, giving us a deeper understanding of ancient Roman society. However, socially, prostitution also symbolizes gender inequality and social stratification. Sex workers were always looked down upon, raising many questions about personal freedom and legal protection. The legalization of prostitution created a paradox: it was recognized, but not respected. These debates continue today as we look back on history to learn how societies handle sensitive issues related to gender, human rights, and social justice. Prostitution in ancient Rome is proof that society can both accept and control things it cannot, or will not, fully eliminate. From this, we might ask, is the existence of prostitution an inevitable part of human society? And how can we balance protecting individual rights with maintaining social order and morality? At the end of this video, we don't just remember the stories of courtesans and brothels, but also reflect on the roles of power, freedom, and the complex nature of humanity throughout history. Prostitution in ancient Rome was not just an activity hidden in the shadows, it became an inseparable part of that vast and complex society. From bustling brothels to impoverished courtesans, from state control to the dark corners of violence and injustice, together, they paint a multifaceted picture of Roman people and society. They were not merely secondary characters in history, they helped shape the cultural, social, and moral layers that still influence us today. So, what do you think about the role of prostitution in history? Is it a profession deserving respect, or is it merely a symbol of decline and injustice? History doesn't just record events, it invites us to reflect, debate, and learn. What would you do if faced with such choices in a society full of contradictions and injustices? Hero or villain? Share your thoughts in the comments, because history is always an ongoing conversation.